Well, first off, the one name that you didn't mention there was Grady Sizemore, and that is the veteran name that baffles me above all else in terms of the Phillies giving playing time to him. But what did we learn in spring training? I guess we learned that Odubel Herrera is an everyday player, or has at least the potential to be an everyday player. We learned that what Jerome Williams provided the Phillies last year in the second half of the season was almost certainly a fluke based on the way he's been hit around this spring. And, we kind of just learned that this rotation is going to be very mediocre. Cole Hamels is going to be going out there every fifth day as long as he's still in the Phillies uniform. But after that, there is just so little in this rotation. You're going to have teams coming in for a weekend series and facing 88-mile-per-hour fastballs all 3 days of the weekend. It's just not going to be too tough against opponents. There wasn't a whole lot that can be gleaned from spring training. The Phillies have a lot of veterans. Like you said, they're still relying on these veteran guys like Chase Utley and Ryan Howard, to, at least in the early going, perform well enough that maybe a suitor comes calling in a trade.
Corey, obviously, we've talked a little bit about this before in terms of, they're going with more veteran guys. A lot of other teams have just played younger players and said, look, we're just going to let you go out there and play. I understand the Phillies don't have a lot, but are there younger players that you think the Phillies should have given an opportunity to play at the start of this season?
Okay, I really don't understand why Grady Sizemore is projected in the opening day lineup with Dominic Brown out. I think that, if Dominic Brown is going to be out, then you shift Ben Revere back to center field, you put Herrera in right field, and you give Darren Ruff an opportunity to play left field. I mean, Darren Ruff is not going to have a lot of everyday opportunities this season, so why not make the most of them while Dominic Brown is sidelined with the Achilles injury by putting Ruff in left field? In terms of other guys, starting pitching-wise, I don't have a problem with the Phillies keeping all of their talented young prospects, pitching prospects, in Double-A, because I don't think that a Zach Eflin or a Tom Windle or a Jesse Biddle, who left today with an injury, or even an Aaron Nola needs to start the season with the Phillies. The Phillies can delay all of their financial clocks, especially Nola, by keeping him down in the minors at least for the start of 2015, and you will see Nola at some point. But right now the Phillies just don't have the talent throughout the farm system to be able to field an everyday lineup at the major league level, and that is most glaring right now by the fact that they had to re-sign Grady Sizemore to a 2-year deal, even though they didn't really need him because there was just so little else in the organization in the outfield.
Corey Seidman, CSN Philly. Corey, you mentioned Nola. When do you anticipate that he will be up and when he will be in the rotation full-time?
I think he'll be up by the beginning of the summer. I think that June, maybe the beginning of July, is a reasonable time. And, that's based on a couple things. One, if Cole Hamels is traded, the Phillies are going to need more starting pitching depth. Two, I think that the Phillies, after a little while, are going to realize that they can't – it just makes no sense to try out a Jerome Williams or an Aaron Harang or a David Buchanan every fifth day and get a rotation full of 5.40 ERAs. And especially if Nola can pitch well at Double-A to start the season, maybe he's moved up to Triple-A by May. If he gets off to a nice start, he'll be up. I mean, he's a guy who's polished, college pitcher, got some praise from Alex Rodriguez and some of the Yankees when he faced them last week in Florida. So I do think that he will be up relatively soon in the 2015 season, and he is one of the bright spots, one of the things to look forward to with this team. And there are some young players. I mean, Cody Ashe, it's going to be nice to watch his development. Hopefully he can give the Phillies something like a 280 batting average, 15 to 20 home runs, kind of take that next step as their third baseman. There are some young pieces here and there. There just aren't as many as you'd like in a rebuild.
Corey, where's Franco in your opinion? Is he a guy that should be up here? Are you okay with him starting the season down? And is he a guy that will be up at some point?
Maikel Franco just needs confidence. I mean, he needs to start the season in the minors. He needs to get off to a hot start and just remember that he can be a very productive power hitter. He hasn't shown that in spring training either of the last 2 years. He's been completely overmatched. He was completely overmatched last September when he came up to the Phillies. So I don't have any problem kind of taking a slow route with him because he's still very young. The hope still exists that he can be a middle-of-the-order, maybe number 5 hitter. His defense is pretty good, solid. He's impressed with his hands and his range over at third base. But just offensively, he needs to be in a good frame of mind, and the Phillies need to pick the right spot with him. They need to bring him up when he's just rolling, when he has like a 2-week streak where he's hitting homers, he's hitting doubles, and he's feeling like he can succeed at the major league level.
Corey Seidman, CSN, Philly.com, looking at the Phillies. We're talking about some of the younger players because obviously that is what a lot of fans are now trained to do with the Sixers, what they have done. I mean, there's a team that won 19 games, but people are into them because you're getting to watch and see guys develop and kind of see and pick and choose guys that you like. The Phillies are not obviously able to do that, but let's talk about maybe their best position player, J.P. Crawford. How far off is he from being a big leaguer?
Well, J.P. Crawford is going to miss probably the first 4 or 5 weeks of the minor league season as he recovers from this oblique strain. Oblique strains are really not anything to toy with in baseball, where there's so much twisting involved in every swing, every throw across the diamond. So, it'll be a slow build to his eventual debut in the minors this season. But I think the hope with J.P. Crawford is that he puts together, a productive 4.5 months at Double-A, and he might even reach Triple-A. I think the Phillies' hope is that by summer of 2016, J.P. Crawford is feasibly able to contribute at the major league level. And he is, he's going to be looked at as one of the saviors of this franchise, the guy who is going to, Freddie Galvis right now is just bridging the gap in between Jimmy Rollins and J.P. Crawford. And the Phillies really need J.P. Crawford to be the two-way shortstop they think he is. His defense was a little suspect last year in his first pro season. I think he committed something like 20 errors at shortstop, so that needs to come down. But the thing that really impresses me with J.P. Crawford is his batting eye. Walks almost nearly as much as he strikes out, and that's one of the few skills that you can look at statistically that often translates from the minors to the majors.
Corey, you just mentioned that this is one of the guys the Phillies are hoping for to help the franchise turn around. That guy used to be Dominic Brown. What is his future, in your opinion? Is he a guy that makes it through the year? Are they going to try to move him, or is he just going to be one of those guys that just kind of – we always will wonder whatever happened to Dom Brown, and yet 10 years later he's still here?
Well, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to move him because I'm not sure that any team wants him or would be willing to trade anything of substance for Dominic Brown. What do I think his future is? Until Dominic Brown shows that he can be a power hitter or he can be a sound defensive outfielder, I don't think he's a starter. I don't think he's a major league starting player. He had the one great month, May 2013, but how long are we going to hold on to that? How real was that? I tend to believe that it wasn't real. I tend to believe that he was just being pitched inside the entire month and facing, a steady diet of inside fastballs that he was able to turn on, and once pitchers adjusted to him, he was never able to make the adjustment back. This is a crucial year for Dominic Brown, and obviously hasn't started out the way he or the Phillies would like, with this Achilles strain that is going to sideline him at least for opening day and the first few weeks of April. But, Dominic Brown, when we talk a year from now, who knows? He might be a non-tender candidate over the winter. I don't see enough in him. I don't see any one skill that he can provide on a daily basis that can make a manager confident starting.
Let's look at Miguel Alfredo Gonzalez. He passed through waivers and nobody picked him up. I mean, they optioned him off the 40, man. How far away is he, and is this an absolute bust of a signing?
It's funny, we just talk about one disaster after another, but
that's all we got here, man.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. And Miguel Alfredo Gonzalez, if you didn't, he's the kind of guy that if it didn't come attached to the name, if it didn't come attached to the $12 million price tag, he would look like just another body in camp. I mean, his mechanics have not been on. His velocity was there this spring, but the command wasn't there. And look, the Phillies wanted him to crack the rotation last spring, and he couldn't do it. So now we're in the second year of this 3-year, $12 million deal. Miguel Alfredo Gonzalez is definitely starting in the minors, and who knows if he can ever make it up, but it just shows how little value he has and the perception of him around the league that any team could have claimed him and taken him for 2 years at about $8 million, and nobody wanted him for that price. So, I guess it just goes to figure that the one time the Phillies do dip their toes into the international free agent market for a high-priced guy, they get the bust.
Yeah, and we were laughing about this yesterday. We're like, one guy from Cuba can't perform at the major league levels, and somehow Ruben Amaro Jr. found that one guy. It seems that everybody else seems to be holding their own or at least having some sort of future, and it doesn't seem that he has a future here with Philadelphia, and we'll see when he goes back. He pitched pretty well in the minors last year, right? When he went to AAA, he had a decent run out of the bullpen. When
he was converted to a reliever, yes. He was throwing strikes, he was throwing hard, but when he came up to the majors, we saw exactly what can happen with him. He can get an out or two and then completely lose focus. Kind of reminds me of Philippe Oman. His command is just not there. And this spring, we saw Miguel Alfredo Gonzalez just elevating so many 93, 94-mile-per-hour fastballs. when you're elevating 93, 94 to major league hitters, those balls are going to go a long way. That's why you allowed 5 home runs in 12 innings.
Corey Seidman, CSNPhilly.com. Corey, let's look at you mentioned Ashe earlier, and he kind of gets lost in the shuffle because he is a younger guy, but he played last year, and therefore it's almost like he's an afterthought. But is he a guy that you look at as a major leaguer and an everyday player?
If Cody Ashe can hit 280, if he can hit 270, if he can provide you 17 to 20 home runs, yes, he's going to be a major league player. But his numbers last year were far off of that. Hit 250 with 10 homers, missed some time with injuries. You know, Cody Ashe has the tools. He has the potential to be the first kind of long-term third baseman the Phillies have had since Scott Rowland. It's just a matter of putting it all together. I think that best-case scenario, Cody Ashe could be a 280 hitter with 17 homers and 30 doubles. But the defense is a key with him, too. A guy who committed 16 errors at third base last year. He showed glimpses of terrific range and a strong arm and, you know, being able to make plays that previous Phillies third basemen were unable to make, but he also struggled with the routine plays. So that's something you want to see cleaned up this year as well. But, you know, Cody Ashe is one guy. If you want to talk about some best-case scenarios for the 2015 Phillies, he's one guy you need to take a step forward, because if you don't have him taking a step forward, I don't really know what you have position player-wise on the horizon.
Yeah, you know, is third base, in your opinion, his position? Is that where they would like? I mean, you would think in a transition year, if they thought maybe he would be an outfielder at some point, that this would have been the spring to try to find out. I'm a little surprised that that wasn't the way they went, but are they looking at him as a long-term third baseman?
I think that if Maikel Franco eventually puts it all together, he will be the long-term third baseman, and at that point, you'll see the Phillies kind of move Cody Ashe around a little bit. Now, over the offseason, they did toyed with the idea of playing Ashe in left field, and he was taking fly balls at their complex over the offseason. But I think what happened this spring is you had a log jam of outfielders. You had so many guys competing for a few spots there, plus Maikel Franco wasn't hitting or putting any pressure on Ashe at third base, so the Phillies were like, why not just put Ashe at his position that he'll be at every day in the 2015 season? But, you know, Cody Ashe was a guy who came up not playing third base. I believe that he was drafted as a second baseman. So he's a guy who you could feasibly put at a couple different positions. And if you ask me if he looks like the prototypical major league third baseman, I got to say no, just based on what I saw defensively last year.
Corey, let's look at some of the mainstays here. Let's start with Hamels, and obviously it looks like he's going to start the season here. Your gut feeling, he'll be dealt by the deadline, or did they get it? Do you think someone finally gives them a deal that they will accept?
Yes, Paul Hamels will be traded by the deadline. I firmly believe that because I see his trade value only increasing over the next couple of months. The Red Sox do not appear to be the fit. Everybody thought all along that would eventually be the trade, Hamels to the Red Sox. They have all the prospects, they have the money, they have the need for an ace. But I just don't see it. If they haven't made the trade to this point, I don't see Boston doing it. The teams to look out for are the Texas Rangers, who lost Yu Darvish and have a few really interesting prospects, one of them being a catcher, Jorge Alfaro, and we know that the Phillies have targeted young catching as part of their return for Hamels. The St. Louis Cardinals, another team to watch, because Adam Wainwright has had some health scares over the spring. And, you know, there can always be teams that emerge out of nowhere. One team I've been thinking about recently is the Arizona Diamondbacks, a team that has Paul Goldschmidt, their superstar, locked up for an affordable price right now. They just went out and signed Yasmani Tomas. They're spending a little bit of money, and they have the prospects to complete a trade for Cole Hamels, and they have the need at starting pitcher, and they could probably use a catcher, too, so maybe throw in Carlos Ruiz. So I'm not saying I've heard anything about the Diamondbacks, but that's just an example of if it's early June, mid-June, and a team finds itself in contention, it can talk itself into needing a guy like Cole Hamels, who will absolutely be the top pitcher on the market.
Corey, obviously, Chase Utley has a lot of power in here, but is there a scenario where you believe that he would go to them and say, yes, I'm willing to leave? I mean, obviously, this is probably going to be an ugly year. Is that going to be enough for him to say, I would be willing to go?
I would hope so. I would hope that at some point this season, the Phillies are able to present Chase Utley with the kind of opportunity that makes him say yes. You know, I heard earlier this week on MLB Network, Dan O'Dowd, the former Colorado Rockies general manager, mentioned the Yankees as a possibility. And you know, it's all up to Utley. He holds all the cards with his 10-5 rights, which he, at this point, hasn't been willing to waive. I think that's another best-case scenario for the Phillies, is that Chase Utley gets out of the gate hot, that he shows some power, the power that he did not have over the second half last year, and he makes himself willing to accept a trade. Because that's what 2015 is going to be all about for the Phillies, is stockpiling younger players by trading off the veterans. They have to do it with Cole Hamels. They have to be able to find some way to get Ryan Howard off this roster. And hopefully they can do it with Utley, too, because second base is still a very thin position, and he's still a productive player that can net you something in return.
Corey Seidman's with us here. We're taking a look at the Philly season, which starts on Monday against the Red Sox over at CSN Philly, at Corey Seidman on Twitter. You can get more of his takes on the Phils. And you just mentioned Ryan Howard. I would assume that the Phillies have done everything they possibly could to try to move him. That doesn't appear to be happening. Is there any reason to think, though, that a much slimmer-looking Howard can surprise people and have a solid first half and drum up some interest?
Well, if spring training is any indication, the answer is no. Ryan Howard's hitting below 200. He's striking out a lot, only has 3 home runs. And to be honest, that kind of worries me, because spring training is a time when pitchers are really working on their fastball command, throwing a ton of fastballs, not worrying as much about the off-speed stuff, and Ryan Howard is still struggling, and that's just an extension of the fact that the last couple of years he's unable to catch up to a major league fastball. I mean, Ryan Howard's a guy who used to dominate spring training. Coming into last spring, Ryan Howard was a career .303 hitter in the spring with 45 home runs and just over 500 at-bats, and that's because he used to feast on fastballs. Can't do that anymore. So unless he gets into some kind of superhuman stretch for a month here in April, or just a whole host of DHs go down in the American League, I don't know that the interest is really ever going to be there for Ryan Howard, even if the Phillies are willing to pick up $50 of the $60 million remaining on his deal.
Corey, let's take a look at right now. Another guy that doesn't get mentioned a lot, we didn't bring him up in the beginning, is Carlos Ruiz. He's another guy they signed to come back here, and he's a veteran player. I would assume, you just mentioned, they're looking for a catcher in a deal, and there's nobody that they felt confident enough to handle that position on a day-to-day basis. But is Ruiz a guy that could also be moved?
Yes, I think he is. A guy who does not have a pricey contract, a guy who has skills offensively, but also carries his reputation around baseball as being one of the preeminent game callers and the kind of guy that a pitcher can really feel comfortable with. I think Carlos Ruiz is still one of the top 15 catchers in baseball, but he's not going to be the centerpiece of any type of deal. I think that he would be maybe a throw-in to a deal where Chase Utley is included, or a deal where Cole Hamels is included, or a deal where Jonathan Papelbon's included. I don't see any team really beating the Phillies' door down to get Carlos Ruiz.
How about Giles? Obviously with the back stuff, there's some people a little bit there, but did you see enough from Giles to think that the guy we saw last year, who looked very, very dominating, do you think that he can match that and continue to evolve into a better pitcher, or are you concerned that maybe year 1 and year 2 will look a little different?
Yeah, I have my reservations with Ken Giles. I do think that he will have a very long and remarkable career as a relief pitcher, but I don't think fans should get used to what they saw last year when he had a 1.18 ERA and a .79 WHIP, because Ken Giles last year exhibited the type of control that he's never had at any point in his major league or his professional career. In the minors, the knock on him was always that his command was subpar. And he came up to the majors last year and walked 2.2 batters per 9 innings, which is far below his career rate in the minors. And then we saw this spring, I think he had 7 or 8 walks in as many innings. So I'm more concerned with Ken Giles' control than I am with his back issues right now. It does look like he'll be ready for opening day, and he will be the Phillies setup man going ahead of Jonathan Papelbon here. But, I would caution fans against expecting Ken Giles to be Mr. Perfect again.
Well, Corey, not a lot of expectations. I had a guy text in the other day. He wanted to bet me that he would take 56 wins and under, and I was like, whoa. So how many wins do you see the Phillies being around?
It's all contingent upon how many games Cole Hamels, stays with the Phillies. If Cole Hamels is here all year, I could see them as a 65-win team. Woo. If Cole Hamels has moved at the deadline, I could see them as like a 57 to 59-win team. And it's going to make it very difficult to judge Ryan Sandberg's managerial abilities because he's working with such an incomplete deck here. But we all knew that this was going to be a rough year for the Phillies. It's probably going to be the worst year of this rebuild as we go forward. But, the positive signs will be there, maybe few and far between, but that's pretty much what Phillies fans have to look forward to is the Cody Asheys of the world, the Ken Gileses of the world. And if Aaron Nola, a guy like that, eventually comes up, interesting to see what he has too.
No doubt. Long season here. Last one for you, Corey. Chase Utley, we talked about possibly moving him, but what should fans expect to see from Chase Utley? Is he a guy that's going to be, drastically dropping off, or is Chase Utley still a guy who you think will be a productive hitter in the middle of this lineup?
I think as long as Chase Utley is relatively healthy, able to be on the field, and has his knees under him, I think that he's going to be a productive hitting second baseman. We saw last year he had a very good first half, was hitting like .330 in April. We've seen this week he homered 4 times in as many plate appearances because the other ones in between were walks. I do worry about the power. He slugged just .350 last year after May 31st. But, as long as Chase Utley's on the field, he's going to be a guy who's going to hit you .280, give you 30 to 40 doubles, maybe 10 to 15 home runs. And at the position he plays, there's some value in that.
All right, Corey Seidman, at Corey Seidman on Twitter, CSN Philly, and you can see him on the television at Phillies Nation. Corey, it's always a pleasure, man. It's going to be a long season.
Yeah, that it is. I hope we talk again soon.